It's Neil with you, the Monday edition of 2020. And over this next hour, you might like to join in our conversation. I'll invite you to do so. Shortly, we'll open our talkback lines. You know, we're in an election season, and we're always concerned on 2020 about how Christians evaluate policies in contrast to those timeless biblical values. Aligning your biblical values to the way you vote might transform the way you think about where Australia is heading. Well, the next election's coming up. Just ahead, there's one on in the ACT on the 19th of October. And then the Queensland state election is on the 26th of October. So where are Christian values most significantly being promoted in a political context? You might say, who's out there talking about anything to do with Christian values? Well, in Western Australia, you still have the Australian Christians, and they've weathered all the political storms over the past 5 years or so, and they remain afloat. But in the rest of the nation, eyes have turned with hope and expectation to the performance of the reborn, reformed Family First Party. Lyle Shelton is National Director of the recently rebirthed Family First political party, and you'll know Lyle Shelton from his history leading the Australian Christian lobby. And through all of those years of turmoil in the marriage debate, and for more than 20 years, in fact, Lyle's been a key participant in Australia's culture wars, and he's our guest through this coming hour. Hey Lyle, a special welcome back to 2020.
Neil, thank you so much. It's great to be with you, and I really appreciate your very generous warm introduction.
Before we get into some things to do with, Australian politics and Christians and our values and where they fit with the context of a lot of policies, you might have overheard us talking with Wendy Francis, who's getting to the point where she's going to hang up the gloves. Perhaps the official fight might be over, although she did say she's still going to be keeping on going in all sorts of other informal capacities. But she did reflect on so many years with the Australian Christian lobby, and your name came up a time or two. I wonder whether you've got a thought or two just around Wendy, who's no doubt listening in right now. But, how do you reflect on her years?
Neil, it's unthinkable that Wendy Francis will no longer be involved in the political advocacy space in the same way that she has for well over a decade now. It's been a privilege of my life to have worked with Wendy in the trenches of the culture wars. We've worked together for many years at ACL, and I can't think of anyone who I esteem more highly than her as someone who's been a fearless advocate for gospel values in politics, but particularly for children, the dignity of women. She has this unique ability to build warm and effective relationships with members of parliament like no one else I've seen. And that's been an invaluable service to the movement to try and bring Christian and family values into politics. So she's going to be sorely missed, and I certainly wish her and Peter all the best. I know they'll never stop being involved in work for the kingdom of God, but this phase of Wendy's career was coming to a close, and that's very sad at one level, but she can certainly leave knowing that she's deserves a well done and good and faithful servant, no doubt about that.
No doubt she'll appreciate those warm words. Hey, we're talking politics today, and we're talking elections. As I said in the introduction, this is an election season, and there's a high likelihood, though, and I might just start with this, that if you're watching mainstream media, any mainstream media, you probably know more about the upcoming US presidential election than you do about the more domestic elections that are happening in our states and territories. Lots of people know all about Donald Trump and the Harris challenges that are going on in the US. What are your thoughts when you get drowned out in an election cycle by some of these international stunts and very cleverly marketed politics?
Well, there's no doubt US politics dominates the globe, and with good reason to some extent, Neil, because what happens in America does affect all of us, particularly in the West. And we're seeing a contest between Kamala Harris, who is a radical extremist in terms of her views on abortion, her views on transgender issues, her views on open borders, her views on economics, and then a very flawed, Donald Trump, who, has probably some questions over his character, but is probably running with some policies which I think are really important for America and for the West. So Look, I'm watching it very closely, but it does tend to drown out other things that are important here locally. But nonetheless, I think what happens in America will affect us profoundly into next year and the years ahead. And I think if Kamala Harris wins, I think we're going to see, the Western world continue on a downward trajectory. I'm not saying Trump is the saviour, but I think his policies can certainly give all of us who are fighting in this space some breathing room, because he'll push back on the transgender stuff. He'll push back on open borders. He'll work on economic policies that will be better for families to get ahead financially, less of a tax burden, better manufacturing opportunities, all of these sort of things, which I think, Australia can, take a lesson from. He'll also push back on the damaging net zero policies, which are causing our inflation and electricity prices to go through the roof. And I think that'll provide cover for better economic policy here in Australia. So they're my thoughts on the US, Neil.
And we might talk some more about the US, but we'll try and keep our focus on things that are going on here in Australia. And with these two upcoming elections, the ACT election 19th of October, the Queensland state election 26th of October, Family First is standing candidates in both of those elections. How extensive is the opportunity for Christians to actually use our preference system to be able to give some level of acknowledgement to the presence there of Family First?
Yeah, look, I think you've hit the nail on the head there, Neil. Look, if you take, both of those jurisdictions, Queensland and the ACT, only have a lower house. They don't have upper houses, which really provide the opportunity for minor parties like ourselves. But we decided to run in both Queensland and the ACT so that we could use any leverage that we might get from the votes that people give us to help shape outcomes. So because there are very few parties, almost none, that are fighting for human rights for the unborn, that are fighting for the truth about children's gender and sound economic policy when it comes to net zero, and the religious freedom issues, we think a vote for Family First and then using 1 second preference for the party of their choice, that sends a huge message to politics that there's a constituency out there who values these things, and it's certainly not a wasted vote. A vote for Family First and a vote for the number 2 party of your choice actually doubles the power of your vote, because it tells politics and politicians that there's people out there who care about the things that they're trying to suppress. And that's the most important thing I think we can do as values-based Christian conservative voters at both of these elections.
Now, just of recent years, while you've been at the helm of Family First, there has been some elections that you've fought in, I think, South Australia and in Victoria, and I think in New South Wales, but you've come close to getting over the line and having a candidate elected, but just fallen short there on a number of occasions. Is there any optimism, or what is the possibility of getting a candidate across the line, say, in the state of Queensland?
It's very difficult in Queensland. You're right, we came very close to getting 3 of our people elected in Victoria and 1 in South Australia. And again, that's because those states have an upper house, and the way the voting works there and the opportunity for preferences, it's a much more rich environment than lower house races. So Queensland is a unicameral parliament, only 1 house, same with the ACT. So we know that it's very difficult. Unless you've got a high-profile celebrity type candidate who can win a lot of primary votes, you need at least 25% of the primary vote. It's difficult to win a lower house seat. But nonetheless, we're running because we want to lift the profile of Family First. We want to elevate the importance of the issues that we are concerned about, which the other parties are suppressing and will not talk about. And we're building for the future. So in the long run, we think we can be competitive in a state like Queensland in Senate races, for instance, because the Senate being an upper house. So perhaps in 2 to 3 electoral cycles' time, as we build the brand, build the awareness that we're back as a political force, that we can certainly be competitive in Queensland, just despite the lack of the state upper house. So that's really the strategy that we're running at. And I'm so thrilled with the candidates that we have, over 50 candidates running in the Queensland election. They all know that it's difficult to win, but they're doing it very self-sacrificially because they know that this is building the profile of the party and building the profile of the issues which are being neglected.
So you've got candidates standing in the ACT, and you've got around 50 candidates that are running in the Queensland state election. And as you say, and I admire, and I think listeners will do too, admiring your honesty here, that lots of those candidates know that they will not be elected, but they are choosing, and often because of their values base, they're choosing to use the opportunity to engage in the issues, to engage in the debate and to build the brand for Family First, no doubt because there's a view towards the next federal election when you hope to be running on all cylinders. Would that be an assessment of where you're going?
Yeah, very much so, Neil. Look, even the next federal election, it's going to be tough, and we'll make a decision about whether we run in Queensland in the federal election after the state election is done. But we're certainly running Senate campaigns in South Australia, Victoria, and here in New South Wales, where I am. But just going back to Queensland, the importance of the self-sacrificial nature of our candidates there is illustrated by the fact that the Queensland LNP under David Crucifili have promised that if they're elected, they will do nothing about Queensland's horrific abortion to birth legislation. Now, that's a captain's call that Crucifili has made. He's instructed all his candidates not to talk about abortion, and they will not change the laws, which are terrible laws, over the next 4 years if they win government. Now, Family First is a pro-life party, and I know Robbie Katter has done some great work with the Born Alive bill, which we totally support. But the LNP will not touch these issues. So we are there to be their conscience, to fight for issues like religious freedom. The LNP didn't fight the Respect at Work bill, which now makes it really hard for Christian schools and churches and other organisations in terms of freedom of speech and expression at work. So there's a whole range of issues where the LNP are missing in action, and we feel it's so important that we're there putting the values on the ballot, and that's the role we can play. It's with a view to the medium to long term. We know that we've got to start somewhere, and by turning up at elections, we can make a difference over time. And that's what our candidates have in mind. And I'm full of respect and admiration and gratitude for them for sacrificing in this way, reputationally, but also financially and with their time to put these values on the ballot.
Well, Lyle Shelton is our guest this hour. I want to open our talkback line. You might like to engage with Lyle. You might have a question. You might want to talk politics and coming from either side because, as you can hear, Lyle Shelton not afraid to put the boot in both sides because the different values that are there in the Family First political party are in contrast to the major parties who are in control of our governments. So 1-800-316-316 if you'd like to join in our conversation, 1-800-316-316. You could also text us on 0447 488 316. Include your name and location, and of course in the app you can click text in button 2 and we'll see if we can get some of those thoughts to air. So 1-800-316-316, back with more with Lyle Shelton, the National Director of the recently rebirthed Family First political party. That's coming just ahead.